Hi everyone, welcome back to The Conversation Continues. We've had so many great questions come in during the webinar that we want to take some time and answer some more of your questions. So let's kick it right off. We have a question from Niv who asks, at what point during the show did you realize that the series was a great template for management and decide to write the book?
Well, there's a bit of a story behind that, Niv. The editor actually approached me, I believe it was about 5 years ago, initially with the idea. And I had watched one episode of the show, which I loved. And as a young boy, really, and also as a teenager, I was a fan of the kind of epic fantasy of that time. So Lord of the Rings and that sort of thing. And when I initially had this idea sort of offered to me, I was a little scared. I thought, wow, that's just a really powerful series from what I've heard. It's very complicated. There's a lot to it. But that kind of fear I felt triggered a sense of excitement. I thought, this could be your hero's journey. This could be a moment for you to embrace something that you're not sure of, because the goal, if you can apply these leadership through fiction ideas to this series, you might come up with something magical. So sometimes in life, I think when we get a little nervous and we feel a little fear, that's a good sign. And this was one of those moments for me.
The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek, which is one of Joseph Campbell's famous lines that Bruce uses in his teaching.
Very true.
So we have another question that comes in, kind of bringing in other characters from the Game of Thrones realm. How would you categorize Tywin Lannister's leadership? Despite the fact that he is a bad guy in this series, but he was so successful in leading.
Yeah. It's interesting when Arya is briefly sort of reporting to Tywin. Of course, he doesn't know that she is Arya Stark. We see the human side of Tywin. I would say even in that dramatic scene where Tywin is skinning a deer and trying to convince Jaime, his son, of his responsibility to their legacy, we see the side of Tywin that is human. To me, Tywin Lannister's potential as a leader, and you should remember that he was Hand of the King under the Mad King, and that was apparently one of the reasons the realm had a certain level of stability during that time with a very unstable king. Tywin has a lot of potential. Yet, as he gets older, my sense is he becomes derailed by this expectation and focus on his family's legacy. So he doesn't build a wider network of real leaders who can challenge him. He has transactional relationships with people he can kind of guide and manipulate to get the victories he wants. And I think it impacts really his ability to help all of Westeros and actually achieve the end results that he wanted, which was to be recognized as a powerful, successful leader throughout history.
Right, yeah. So we see, examples of leaders being derailed by not following their values, following EQ, following contextual intelligence. Another example of this I know we talked about was Stannis Baratheon, and how, you mentioned Cersei earlier, but how he also kind of fell under the spell of bad advisorship and bad mentorship, and how that turned out for him.
Yeah, I mean, Melisandre advises him to do a number of things, most dramatically immolate, put to death by fire different people from their community. And if we jump back to contextual intelligence, when Stannis burns his own daughter, Shireen, to death, he really loses the followership of his stakeholders and all these different people that were kind of leaning his way because he has sort of crossed such a horrible line. So I think we always have to find a way to recognize our own values at times of stress and make sure that our advisors aren't pushing us in some direction that we'll deeply regret. And that's clearly what happens with Stannis when he makes that decision regarding his daughter.
Well, going back to Daenerys, so we had a question come in about her as a change agent to the Dothraki or in Meereen. How does she do it? What does she do? What kind of just concretely define what makes her so successful?
It's interesting, and this gets to me back to her values of equality, responsibility, and courage. When she's with the Dothraki, for example, when they have captured the Lazarene, her commitment is to try to take the good qualities of the Dothraki nomadic warrior society, but also bring in some humanity, sort of help them recognize that they can be true to their culture, but they can also treat other people in a better way. Now, of course, this goes wrong with the Magi, but she takes this same attitude going forward when she goes to Marine, and when she eventually gets the Unsullied army. Her commitment as a change agent is that slavery is just wrong. Slavery cannot be accepted. And she believes that very strongly. This creates incredible allies for her. So I think, and then another thing happens in Marine. The slave pits she shut down because she doesn't want to see slaves war against each other. She is convinced to sort of reopen them in a specific way. So I think she's always trying to balance her bigger purpose in driving equality and achieving her top value of freedom. But at the same time, she is aware that sometimes there's a balance involved, that she can't just impose her will on these different cultures without losing followership.
Great, great. So I know in the book you must discuss other characters beyond Daenerys. So do you have any other examples of characters who exhibit exceptional organizational leadership?
Well, I think there's a number of examples. Some that just come to mind for me right at the moment. Jon Snow, when he is made Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, he recognizes at a certain point that he has to make a choice with regards to the wildlings. If he leaves the wildlings on the other side of the wall, which is what some of his direct reports want him to do, they will be killed by the White Walkers and they will be weaponized. They will become another part of the enemy force that his very depleted group of Night's Watch will need to fight. So he makes a strategic choice to work with Tormund Giantsbane and invite the wildlings over to his side of the wall. This is a very brave decision because he knows a lot of his followers won't agree, and they don't agree. Now, where I think he stumbles, and he's very impressive all through the story, where he stumbles is that he tries to just impose his will at a certain moment. He feels a constraint of time. He knows that the White Walkers are closing in on his people, and he tries to just force his resistant followers to agree with his plan. As we know, that doesn't work out well for him. So Jon is and then as a leader, he needs to come to terms when he is brought back by Melisandre. He needs to come to terms with the fact that everything he did led to a betrayal by his people. And so that's hurt him, but he comes out of that stronger. I would say Arya learns very specifically from coaching. We mentioned that term of mentorship during the live feed. Sam Tarwell, I mean, if you remember, he arrives in Castle Black. He's unwilling to fight. He gets knocked into the dirt. He's got blood in his mouth. He won't even try to fight. He goes beyond the wall in the great ranging north with the old bear and his group. And in that time north of the wall, Sam meets Gilly, who he falls in love with. He also discovers dragonglass, and it connects him with the history of the land. And he's a very intellectual person, fascinated by ideas and history. And what we see with Sam, which I think is relevant to all of us in leadership, is an incredible ability to adapt, an ability to continue to enter different environments and adapt when he goes to Old Town, when he comes back, et cetera, et cetera. I guess last I would just throw in Sansa and her capacity to be resilient. She goes through a very, very difficult journey early on, and she continues to find ways to lead herself through that, and it comes out very, very strong and inspiring leader.
Great. So it's interesting to note and to see that it's not just the traditional heroes in the story that learn and grow and have arcs of, their progression. It's also some of the side characters, the Sams, the, you might even say the Sansas, who still have a part to play in the story and who still take valuable lessons from the world around them and, follow their own EQ. So it's really great to see how the whole Game of Thrones world is kind of benefiting from leadership lessons.
You know what I would add to that too is, that you're getting me to think about this, is Jaime Lannister, when he's captured by the Bloody Mummers and he's with Brienne, at one point his hand has been cut off and Brienne says, "Are you only a sword hand? Shouldn't you be more than a sword hand?" And he has to go through this really trying moment of humility and recognize that he wants to choose leadership. He could fall into being a victim and say, my one skill was taken away from me. And he doesn't do that. And all through Game of Thrones, you see people confront the loss of something that mattered to them and find a way to be humble and yet also strong and push forward. And usually what's helping them push forward is their concern for other people. So in Jaime's case, it was a concern for Brienne. It's a concern for Jon Snow. It was a moment recognizing that his siblings were alive. It's the concern for other people that really motivates the leaders in that show. And I think that's a lesson we can all take.
Great. And you also alluded to the fact that Brienne is telling Jaime, are you a player or are you a victim? Which is another great point and, something you might want to expand upon.
Yeah, well, we talk a lot in Columbia about this concept of player versus victim. And to put it the most simply, we all get confronted by things that are difficult for us. Moments where systems, we're trying to achieve something and there's a lot of forces out there that are pushing us back or making it difficult for us. Player mode, which is the simple way of putting it, is about recognizing that we always have choice. Even when things are difficult, and honestly sometimes they're very difficult, we have the choice on how we're going to react. In Game of Thrones, the stakes are very high for everyone all the time. And the characters that survive are the characters that have a concern for other people, and they can step into player mode when their backs are against the wall. Like Daenerys, they can all find a moment to ride dragons and choose to fight for what they care about.
Great. Well, on that note, we want to thank you again, Bruce, for a very engaging webinar, a very engaging after the conversation. And I know you and I are both looking forward to the next season to see who really does win or die and who masters the Game of Thrones. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.